The bread was 79 cents, and the can of evaporated milk was $1.12, and Renata Vaughn was 2.73 cents short, so she took off her coat and laid it on the counter of the corner store on St. Claude Avenue at 6:52 on a Tuesday night in January. It was a heavy coat. Wax canvas, faded to the color of old brick, brass buttons down the front, and one button near the collar that did not match, a plain black one, sewn on by hand a long time ago by someone who was not her. She was not cold because she wanted to be. She was cold because a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old were waiting in a one-bedroom on Delary Street, and neither of them had eaten since the free lunch at school. "Keep the door open behind me," she told the man at the register, because 2 people were coming in and the wind pulled the glass shut hard. He nodded and slid the bread and the milk across. Outside, a car had stopped at the curb. Not for gas. Not for directions. It had been rolling toward the interstate on-ramp when the man in the back seat saw the coat go up over the counter through the Zdvado and told his driver to pull over without knowing yet why the word had left his mouth. Desmond Ellery was 58 years old and worth $1.4 billion, and he had not looked twice at a coat in 30 years. He looked twice at this one. It was not the woman. It was not the store. It was the button, the black one at the collar on a rust-red wax canvas coat with brass down the front. He knew that button. He had sewn one exactly like it on a coat exactly like it in the winter of 1986 with cold hands on a dock uptown when he was 19 and had a baby sister and 40 cents. He had worn that same coat. His hand was already on the door handle. Somewhere in America right now a woman was deciding in the cold whose warmth counted more than hers. Most of the time no one is watching when she decides. Tonight someone was. 6 hours before the coat went up over the counter, Renata Vaughn sat at her kitchen table at 4118 Delary Street and looked at her phone. The balance on the screen was $6. She looked at it the way you look at a number you already know, hoping the second look changes it. It did not. 618. Rent was $150 a month. She was $2,040 behind. And taped to the outside of her front door where the whole street could read it was a single sheet of paper with a case number on it, 2024 EV 8871, and the words 14 days to vacate. She did not cry at the table. She had a rule about that. You do not cry where the children can see the arithmetic land on your face. Micah was 7 and already dressed for school, sitting on the couch with his backpack on both shoulders like he was ready to run. In the front pocket of that backpack was a blue rescue inhaler. He knew there were 2 doses left in it. He had counted. He was not going to tell his mother he had counted, because his mother's face did a thing when she found out something cost money, and he had learned to stop being the reason her face did that thing. So he sat quietly with the backpack on and breathed carefully in through the nose the way the nurse at Israelite Baptist had shown him, and said nothing. Aaliyah was 5. She was at the table with her mother drawing. She was always drawing the same thing. A door. A red coat on a hook beside the door. And the door every single time, standing open. A gap of white crayon where the door met the frame, left deliberately, never colored in. Renata had asked her once what it was. Alia had said, "So they can come in." Renata had not known who they was, and Alia had not explained, and the drawing went up on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a strawberry, next to 11 other drawings of the exact same door. Renata did not know where the drawing came from. But she knew where the coat came from, and she knew where the open door came from, because both of them came from the same porch. Odessa Vaughn, everybody on Deslon Street called her Des, had a hot plate and a folding table and a rule. After the water came in 2005 and took the first floor of everything, Des set that folding table on her porch and cooked for the block off a single burner run on a generator that a man named Papa Chase kept fueled with gas. He siphoned from a truck the city had abandoned 3 streets over. Red beans on Monday. Whatever came in a can on the days between. No menu. No money changed hands. And Des fed people who could not pay, and she fed them off the porch with the front door standing open behind her the whole time, in January, in the cold, even when the neighbors told her she was letting the heat out of the house. "I know I'm letting the heat out," Des would say. That's the point. Renata was 13 that winter, and she carried plates, and one night she asked her grandmother why she gave away the coat off her own back to the Menard boy when it was freezing, and she had a chest cold herself. And Des told her the thing that Renata would carry for the next 21 years. The thing she could still hear in the woman's exact voice. You don't sell the coat off your back till the child's fed. And when you do, when it comes to that, you leave the door open so the cold knows it's welcome to you and not to them. Renata had understood it at 13 to mean, this is how you lose things with dignity. You give the cold somewhere to go that isn't your baby's. You stand in the doorway yourself. She had spent 21 years believing the lesson was about who takes the cold. She had it half right. Des had been gone 4 years. The porch was gone longer than that. But the coat on the refrigerator door in crayon, with the black button Aaliyah, always drew a different color because she'd never seen the real one. That coat was Des's coat, the rust-red wax canvas work coat that had come to Renata when the estate came to Renata, which is to say it came with almost nothing else. A coat, a cast iron pot, a Bible with a rubber band around it, and a lesson about doors. Renata worked as a home health aide. 29 hours a week, because at 30 they would have had to give her benefits, so they gave her 29. Take home was 400 cents a week. She could do the math on that faster than a calculator, because she did it every week, standing up at this same table. $412.60 times 4 is $1,640, and rent is $1,150, and that leaves $500.40 for electricity and food and the bus and Micah's medicine and Aaliyah's shoes and the $2,340 she was already behind, which 540 cents a month does not touch, does not dent, does not begin to move. She had a credit score of 512. 512. She had applied for a second job at a warehouse in Chalmette, a distribution center, 40 hours, real hours, and she had not heard back, and the not hearing back had its own weight by now. 14 days. That was the other number. It sat on the door. She stood up from the table. She put the last of the coffee, which was really the second boiling of yesterday's coffee, into a thermos. She kissed Aaliyah on the part in her hair. She checked, without letting Micah see her check, that the inhaler was in the backpack pocket, and she saw that it was, and she did not know it was nearly empty, because Micah had made sure she would not know. Walk fast, she told them. It's cold. The walk to the school was 6 blocks, and the cold that morning had teeth. Renata put Micah on the inside, away from the wind, and held Aaliyah's hand, and the three of them moved fast up Delary toward Desland, with their breath going out in front of them in little clouds. Micah did not complain about the cold. Micah had learned that complaining about the cold was a thing that also landed on his mother's face. So instead he watched the sidewalk and breathed careful, in through the nose, and about 4 blocks in he felt the tightness start low in his chest, the familiar hand closing, and he did the thing he had taught himself to do, which was to slow his steps a half count so it looked like he was just tired and not like his lungs were folding. He did not reach for the inhaler. 2 doses. He was saving them. He did not know for what exactly. He was 7, but he had done the math the way his mother did math, and the math said 2 was almost none, and almost none was a thing you held on to. At the corner of Desland, a woman named Miss Charlene, who had known Des, was sweeping her step, and she straightened up and looked at the 3 of them going by, and she looked a beat too long at Renata with no bag, no lunch handed off, just walking her babies to the door. Renata felt the look. She lifted her chin and said, "Good morning, Miss Charlene," in a voice that closed the subject, and Miss Charlene said good morning back and let it close, because that was the courtesy on that street. You saw, and you let a proud woman keep her back straight, and you found a quieter way to help later. Renata kissed both children at the school fence. She checked, without letting Micah see her check, that the inhaler was in the backpack pocket, and she saw the shape of it through the nylon and was satisfied. And she did not know it was nearly empty, because Micah had made sure she would not know. He waved at her with the whole arm the way small children do and went in. At 6:04 that same morning, on the other side of a city that is really several cities pretending to be one, Desmond Ellery was awake in the back of a car he usually drove himself. He drove himself as a rule. He rode in the back only when he was too tired to trust his own hands on the wheel, and this week he had been that tired, Because Ellery Provisions was closing on a cold storage acquisition, and there were 22,000 people whose paychecks moved through decisions he had not delegated in 30 years, and was not about to start delegating now. Theo had driven for him for 19 of those years. Theo knew the difference between the boss who wanted to talk and the boss who wanted the radio low and the window cracked. And this morning it was the second one, so Theo drove and said nothing, and the heater ran, and the city went by cold and blue. The heater ran. The window stayed cracked. They passed a man at a bus stop with no coat, arms crossed, jogging in place. Desmond watched him until the man was gone behind them, and then he said to the window more than to Theo, "I had a coat once. Kept me alive one winter." Theo had heard the edges of this before. Not the middle of it. Never the middle. He knew there had been a dock, Fulton Street, cold storage, the year Desmond was 19. He knew there had been a sister, younger, and that Desmond paid for a nursing program for somebody decades ago and would not say who. He knew that once a year in the deep cold, the boss got quiet in a specific way that had nothing to do with acquisitions. "You never told me what happened to that coat," Theo said. "I sold it," Desmond said. He was quiet for a block. Then, because it was January and the acquisition had worn him down past the place where he kept things sealed, he said a little more than he usually said. He said the docks paid a boy of 19.90 an hour to move frozen product in a room kept at 11 degrees, and that the coat was the only thing between him and that room, and that there had been a winter, 86, the bad one, when the pipes froze citywide, when he and his sister had gone 4 days on what he could carry out in his pockets, and on the 5th day the choice got simple in the way the cold makes choices simple. A coat is warmth. A coat is also at a pawn window, $2 and change. And $2 and change is a loaf of bread and a can of milk for a girl who is 8 years old and has stopped complaining. That was the part that scared him. Not the crying. The quiet. When a hungry child goes quiet. "So I sold the coat," Desmond said. "Walked home in my shirt. It was the coldest I have ever been. It is still the coldest I have ever been, and I've stood in a lot of cold rooms since on purpose to make sure I remembered it." And then he did not say the rest, did not say what he bought with it, or who he bought it for, or what the man who gave him the next coat had said to him with a hand on his shoulder that Desmond had spent 40 years trying and failing to say to anyone else. He just watched the cold go by. Theo let it sit. Some things you don't drive into. The heater ran. The window stayed cracked. And a debt that Desmond Ellery had been carrying since 1986 rode in the back seat with him, the way it rode with him every January, unpaid, because he had never once found the person he was supposed to pay it to. Her shift that day was Mr. Outside 91 on Tricou Street, in a house that smelled of camphor and old wood and the specific sweetness of a body that does not move much anymore. She let herself in at 8 with the key on the string by the mailbox. She washed him with a cloth and warm water and a plastic basin, and she turned him, and she checked the skin at the base of his spine where the sores start, and she found it clean, and she was proud of that the way you are proud of a small thing you did right, in a week where nothing large would go right. Mr. Alcide called her Corinne. Corinne had been his wife. She had been gone 11 years. Renata did not correct him. She had learned early in this work that a name is sometimes a door a person needs left open, and if walking through it as Corinne for 6 hours meant the man ate his lunch and took his pills and told a story about a dance at the Autocrat Club in 1961, then she was Corinne, and she was glad to be. "You always did know how to do this right," he told her, meaning the turning, meaning the cloth, meaning being handled by hands that did not resent the handling. "My grandmother taught me," Renata said. Which was true. Des had cleaned houses and minded the sick on this same side of the canal for 40 years, and had taught Renata that you do the low work like it's holy, because to the person receiving it, it is. She clocked 29 hours that week across 4 clients, and this was the last of them, and when she left Mr. Alcide's at 6:15 the dark had already come down hard and blue. She walked home instead of taking the bus, because the fare was $1.25 each way, and she had chosen, standing at the stop with her hand in her pocket around the coins, to keep the $2.50. She had come in the door and found $618 still on the screen, and 2 children who had eaten a free lunch 9 hours ago and nothing since. The refrigerator was empty except for condiments and half a stick of butter. The cabinet had rice, but the gas had a smell to it now that made her ration the burner. There was a can of nothing. There was 6 18s. She looked at the coat on the hook by the door. She looked at the drawing of the coat on the hook by the door, in crayon, with the open gap of white where the door met the frame. And she took the coat off the hook and put it on and told the children she'd be back before the news. And she left. And here is the thing she did without thinking about it. The thing that was so far under her skin she could not have told you she did it. She left the front door standing open a hand's width behind her in January, so the cold would follow her out and not stay in the room with them. The hook by the door was empty now. Selling the coat isn't losing your warmth. It's deciding in the cold that someone else's warmth counts more than yours, and that decision is the only thing the cold can never take back. She walked to St. Claude with 6 18s and a coat she was about to not have. The paper on the door had a number on it, and 3 days after Renata sold the coat, a second paper went up beside the first. And this one was worse, because this one had a name at the bottom that was not a machine's name. It was signed, Curtis Hale, Regional Property Manager, Broadmoor Residential. A real hand had put ink to it. Broadmoor did not own the building at 4118 Delary. Almost nobody who signs an eviction owns the building. Broadmoor managed it, on contract, for a limited liability company in Dallas that owned it on paper for an investment fund in a third place that no tenant on Delary Street had ever heard of and never would. The rent went up a pipe from Renata's hand to a spreadsheet, and somewhere at the top of that pipe a line item that said 4118B had gone red, and when a line item goes red, a process starts, and the process has a person's name on it, and the name was Curtis Hale. Curtis was 47. He wore a lanyard and drove a leased sedan and had a laminated card in his desk drawer that spelled out the policy in 9 words: no partial payment, no exceptions, unit to be vacated. He did not write those 9 words. He had inherited them from the last regional manager, who had inherited them from the fund. But Curtis enforced them the way some men enforce things they did not write, with a little extra, a shine of correctness, because a man who did not make the rule can still make himself necessary by being the one who never bends it. The second notice said the same 9 words. 14 days had become 11, and it said one more thing in smaller print that Renata read twice standing in the cold hallway. The unit had been flagged for expedited processing. She did not know what that meant. She knew it was not good. She knew that expedited is a word that costs the person it is aimed at and saves the person who typed it, and that was all she needed to know about it for now. Curtis Hale flagged it himself. He did it from a leased sedan in a parking lot on Poland Avenue, on a laptop balanced on the center console at 11:40 in the morning, eating a gas station sandwich, and it took him about 90 seconds. He pulled up the portal. He found 4018B. He clicked a box that said priority. He clicked a second box. He closed the laptop. He did not think about the woman. This is important, and it is not an excuse. He did not picture her. To Curtis, 4118B was not a person and not even a door. It was a cell in a column, and the column had a number at the bottom that his own bonus was tied to, a number called turnover, which measured how fast a unit that had gone red could be emptied, cleaned, relisted, and re-rented at the new rate, which was $1,350, $200 more than Renata paid. Every unit he turned inside a target window paid him a figure that Curtis, if pressed, would have described as modest. It was $500 a unit. He had turned 9 units that quarter. He was chasing 12. That was the math Curtis did. He did not do it out loud. He did not do it cruelly. He did it the way a man does the math that keeps the lights on in his own house. And if you had stopped him in that parking lot and told him a 7-year-old 2 miles away was rationing an inhaler because his mother had chosen the light bill, Curtis would have been genuinely sorry and would have flagged the unit anyway, because the sorrow and the flag lived in 2 different parts of him that had learned, over a career, never to be in the same room at the same time. Whether that is a thing a man can be forgiven for is a question with an answer. Curtis just had not gone looking for it yet. She had $300. She had made it by not doing several things. She had not filled Micah's inhaler, which she still believed had doses in it. She had not paid the light bill in full, betting the disconnect notice was slower than it looked. She had not bought anything for herself, and there was nothing to point to that proved that, which is the nature of the sacrifice, it leaves no receipt. 340 was 3/4 of a month of not doing, folded flat in an envelope, in the inside pocket of a jacket that was not the coat, because the coat was gone. She took the $340 to the Broadmoor office on Poland Avenue on her lunch hour. On the bus, both directions, $250 she chose to spend because this was worth spending it on. The office had a counter and a plexiglass divider left over from the last thing everyone was afraid of, and behind the divider sat a woman named Lorna Petit, 39, leasing clerk, who had worked there 6 years and hated the sound the printer made when it spat out a notice. A specific mechanical sound she heard in her sleep now. Renata slid the envelope through the tray under the plexiglass. She said it was $340. She said she got paid Friday and could bring $200 more. She said she had been in that unit 5 years and never once been late until the hours got cut, and that she was not asking for it to be erased, only for it to be counted, for the number to move in the right direction, for someone to write down that she was trying. She said all of this plainly, without heat, the way you report facts to someone you have decided to treat as a person, even when the plexiglass is between you. Lorna looked at the envelope in the tray and did not pick it up. I can't take a partial, she said. The system won't let me apply it. It'll bounce it back and it still shows unpaid, and then it looks like, it just makes it worse on your end. I'm not supposed to take it. Renata looked at her for a moment through the plexiglass. You're not supposed to, Renata said. Or you can't. And Lorna, who knew the difference, and who had a car payment and a mother in Slidell and a job she could not lose, did not answer the question, which was its own answer. Renata took the envelope back out of the tray. She did not beg. She did not raise her voice. She folded the flap down, and she put it back in the inside pocket. And she stood up straight, and she said thank you for your time to a woman who had not helped her, because Des had raised her to be the kind of person the room remembers with shame later. Then she walked out with her $340 and her back straight, past a plaque on the wall that said Broadmoor Residential. Building communities that last, and she did not laugh at it, because she was too tired to laugh at it, and laughing at it would have cost something too. Behind the plexiglass, Lorna Petit sat with her hands in her lap and listened to the door close, and did not feel good about a single part of what had just happened, and did it anyway, because that is how most harm gets done. Not by villains. By people with car payments. Here is a number. In an average year in this country, landlords file for eviction roughly 3.6 million times. That figure comes from the Eviction Lab at Princeton University, which has spent years assembling eviction records that were never collected in one place before. Millions of filings year after year in ordinary times. And in a great many of those cases, the tenant is not refusing to pay. The tenant is trying to pay part, offering what they have, the way Renata offered $340, and being turned away, because a growing share of the country's rental housing is no longer managed by a person you can find, but by third-party firms working off software with a policy card in a drawer. The person at the counter often cannot take a partial payment even when they want to. The system is built so the answer is no before a human is involved. The math on the tenant's side is brutal and simple. Housing counselors will tell you that once a filing is entered, it can cling to a rental record for years and lock a family out of the next unit before they have lost this one. A single filing, whether or not it ends in a removal, becomes a mark. Renata had seen the mark work on other people. She had a cousin, Deja, who spent a year and a half getting turned down at rental office after rental office for a filing that had been dismissed, thrown out, the judge himself saying she owed nothing. And it did not matter, because the software that screened applicants did not read outcomes. It read the filing. Deja moved 4 times in that year and a half into worse each time, and Renata had watched it and had thought, back then that will not be me, I pay on time, and had been right for 4 years and 10 months. 58 consecutive payments. Never once late. Until the hours got cut, and the button did not have a setting for that. 3.6 million times a year. The system did not have a button that said, she is trying, It had a button that said unpaid and the button that said expedite, and someone had pressed both. Not out of hatred. That is the part people get wrong about how this works. Nobody up the pipe hated Renata Vaughn. Most of them did not know her name. The harm was not personal. It was procedural, which is worse, because you cannot look procedure in the eye and ask it to reconsider. But a street is not a spreadsheet, and news moves down Delary faster than paper moves up it. By the weekend, Sister Beulah knew. Sister Beulah was 66 and had run the kitchen ministry at Israelite Baptist on Flood Street since before the storm, and she had known Des, had cooked beside Des on that porch, and she operated on a principle older than any fund in Dallas. You look after your own before you go asking a stranger to do it. She did not organize a fundraiser with a flyer and a hashtag. She did it the way it had always been done on that block. A pot got made bigger. An envelope started moving pew to pew on Sunday, no announcement, folded bills, whatever people had, $7 here, a 20 from a man who could not spare it. Miss Charlene put in. Papa Chase's grandson put in. It came to $310 by the following Wednesday, and it was not enough, and everyone knew it was not enough, and they did it anyway, because doing the not enough thing together is how a block tells its own people they are not carrying it alone. Beulah brought the $310 to Renata's door in a coffee can, and when Renata's pride came up in her throat, because it always did, Beulah headed it off the way only a churchwoman of a certain age can. This isn't charity, Beulah said. This is the block paying you back for every plate your grandmother handed off that porch. You think Des fed this street for free? No, baby. She was buying insurance. And it's paid up. Take the can. And on the way out, Beulah left Renata's front door standing open a moment longer than she needed to, propping it with her hip while she settled her coat, the cold coming in around her, and neither woman said a word about it, because both of them had learned the same rule from the same porch, and some lessons you do not explain to the person who already knows them. Renata took the can. It was not enough. 11 days had become 8. And somewhere up the pipe, on a spreadsheet in a city she would never see, the line item that said 418B still glowed red, and the man whose name was on the paper still had not bent, and would not, because bending was the one thing that made him unnecessary. That night the cold came down harder, the kind of cold the Ninth Ward is not built for, and the gas smell in the kitchen kept Renata from running the burner high, so she boiled rice on a low flame and put both children in one bed under every blanket in the house. Micah lay in the dark and did the arithmetic of his lungs. He knew the cold was bad for him. He knew what the tightness meant. He had the inhaler under his pillow where his mother would not see it, and he took it out and shook it next to his ear, the way he had watched her shake things to gauge what was left, and it was light. Very light. He pressed it once, a test spray into the dark, and heard the sound it made when it was almost done. A thin sound, mostly air. 1 dose. Maybe. He put it back under the pillow. He was 7, and he made a decision a 7-year-old should never have to make. He would hold the last dose in reserve for a night worse than this one. He would get through this night on his own, breathing slow, in through the nose, counting, so that his mother would not have to know the inhaler was almost empty. So she would not have to add that number to the stack of numbers she carried up the stairs every night. The woman who had sold her coat. Who had walked home in the cold to keep $2.50. Who checked his backpack every morning, thinking the thing inside it was full. He was protecting her. That was the shape the love took in him. It took the shape of a secret, and a secret is a door pulled quietly shut, and this is the one time in this story that a door being shut was the wrong thing, and no one knew it yet. Aaliyah slept beside him with a crayon still in her hand. On the floor by the bed was a fresh drawing. The coat. The hook. The door, standing open, the gap of white where the door met the frame, uncolored, waiting. 8 days. Desmond Ellery could not put the coat down. He had run a company for 30 years by being able to close a thing and move to the next thing. It was the whole skill. You decide, you sign, you do not carry it into the next room. And for 11 days he had been unable to do it. The coat rode with him to the cold storage closing in Houston and back, sat in on a board call, woke him at 4 twice. Rust red wax canvas, brass buttons, 1 black one at the collar. He knew that button because he had sewn its twin, and a man does not forget the specific clumsiness of his own 19-year-old hands. On the third night, he told Theo to take him back to St. Claude Avenue. The store was still open. The same man was at the register. Desmond did not go in as himself, did not go in as $1.4 billion, did not use the voice that ended meetings. He went in as a tired older man in a good coat asking a quiet question, and he bought a coffee he did not want, and he asked, easy like it did not matter, about a red work coat somebody had traded a few nights back. The clerk remembered. You remember when a person trades their coat for bread. He said a woman brought it in, cold night, wouldn't take money, only the swap, bread and a can of milk. Said keep the door open behind her. He still had the coat in the back, hadn't priced it yet, figured he'd hang it on the rack for $8 and let it go to whoever. Desmond asked to see it. The man brought it out and laid it on the counter, and Desmond Ellery looked down at a coat he had last seen in 1986. The store went quiet. Not the room. Inside one man's head. Now there was a coat on a counter. His coat. Someone had worn it into the same cold, and she had left the door open behind her. Out in the car, when he came back holding it, Theo looked at the coat and then at the boss and understood that this was the middle of the thing he had never been told. 19 years of driving, and Theo had only ever had the edges, a dock, a sister, a coat. He had half wondered, over the years, whether the boss had built the whole story up bigger in his own head than it had been, the way a man will polish one hard winter into a myth to explain himself to himself. Then he saw the button. The black one at the collar, plainly the wrong color, plainly sewn by a hand that did not know how. And Theo, who did not say much, said the only thing that needed saying, which was that he'd be damned, and that in 19 years he had never once seen the boss look like this, and that whoever this woman was, they were not driving to the interstate tonight. It was the closest Theo had ever come to giving Desmond an order, and Desmond took it. The coat was real, and that was the thing Theo could see plainly now. Not a myth, the boss told himself, but a real coat, worn by a real woman, in the real cold 40 years after the first time. He was 19 the winter he sold his. The docks on Fulton Street ran cold storage for the wholesalers uptown, and they hired boys by the shift to move frozen product in and out of a room they kept at 11 degrees, and they paid 90 cents an hour, and the coat you wore was your own problem. Desmond had one coat. Rust-red wax canvas, brass buttons, bought secondhand, one button gone that he replaced with a black one off a dead man's jacket at the Goodwill on Rampart, because it was the only button in the jar that was close to the right size. He had a sister, Yolanda. 8 years old that winter, and their mother already gone, and it was just the two of them in a room off Poland Avenue with a hot plate and a mattress and the coat. She had a cough that year that Desmond could not fix, and no coat of her own that fit, and she wore his in the room while he was at the docks, which is part of why the arithmetic went the way it went. He would tell you, if you got him to talk about it, which almost no one ever had, that he did not sell the coat for himself. He sold it for the cough and the 8-year-old inside it. What happened to Yolanda after that winter was a thing Desmond did not tell Theo, did not tell the board, did not tell the foundation named after nobody in particular, so no one would ask who. It was the one closed room he never reopened. Not tonight either. Not yet. The bad freeze came in January. Pipes burst all over the city. Work stopped at the docks for 6 days because the trucks could not run, which meant no shifts, which meant no 90 cents an hour, which meant that by the 5th day Desmond and Yolanda had eaten the last of what was in the room, and there was nothing. And a can of milk and a loaf of bread was $2 and change, and a coat at the pawn window on St. Claude was $2 and change. So he did the arithmetic that the cold makes simple. He walked to the pawn window in his shirt. He came back with bread and milk and no coat, and he told Yolanda he'd left it at work, and she was 8, and she believed him, and he fed her, and then he sat in the corner of that room in his shirt and was colder than he has ever been, before or since. And on the 6th night a man found him. His name was Mr. Boudreau. He ran a loading crew, and he had seen Desmond on the docks, and he had heard from somebody at the pawn window about a boy who'd sold a coat off his back, and he came around to the room off Poland Avenue in the dark with a coat over his arm, a heavy one, lined, worth real money, and he did not knock and say, "Here," Poor boy, have this. He knew better than that. He knocked and said he had a coat that didn't fit him anymore, and it was going to go to waste, and would Desmond do him the favor of taking it off his hands, and while he was at it, would he come run the 6 a.m. crew Monday because Boudreaux was short a man he could trust. He gave Desmond a coat and a job in the same breath, and dressed both of them up as a favor to himself, so the boy would not have to be rescued, only useful. And then Boudreaux said the thing. He put a hand on Desmond's shoulder, and he looked at him. Really looked, the way you look at a person you have decided to see all the way to the bottom of. And he said, I know what you did with that coat. I know exactly what you did. And I need you to hear me, it counts. You hear me? It counts. You're not carrying that girl by yourself anymore. Desmond Ellery was 58 years old, worth $1.4 billion, standing over a coat on a counter on St. Claude Avenue, and he had spent 39 years trying to find a single human being he could say those words to, and had never once said them, because you cannot repay the man who said them to you. Boudreaux was 20 years dead. You can only pass it down the line, and Desmond had built a fortune and a foundation and a name, and had never, not once, found the person the coat was pointing him to. Now there was a coat on a counter. His coat. Someone had worn it into the same cold, and she had left the door open behind her. He bought it for $8, and he did not tell the clerk who he was. And then he did a thing that surprised even Theo, who had seen him do a great many things. He did not ask for the woman's name. He did not send a lawyer or a check or an assistant with a folder. He told the clerk that the next time that woman came in, and she would come in, people come back to the store that knows them. The clerk should quietly clear whatever was on her tab, and put groceries in her bag, real food, and tell her it was already handled, and not say by who. He paid the clerk $200 against it, and said he'd cover the rest, and he wrote a number on a napkin where the clerk could reach him, and he made the man repeat the instruction back. Clear the tab, fill the bag, say it was handled. Do not say by who. Until he was sure the clerk understood that the second half mattered as much as the first, that the not saying was not a detail, but the whole design. It was not charity. Desmond was specific about that in his own head, in the way the wound made him specific. Charity would have been writing her a check and feeling the warm thing you feel when you write a check. This was not for him. This was invisible on purpose. Boudreaux had made it a favor so the boy could keep his back straight, and Desmond was going to keep this woman's back straight the same way, from behind, where she could not see him do it, because the whole point, the entire point, the thing the coat had been trying to tell him for 11 days, was that being seen is the gift and being managed is not, and he was not going to insult her sacrifice by turning it into a line item on his own conscience. He just wanted to know who she was, not to fix her, to see her. So the next morning he went to Delary Street himself, not as Ellery provisions, as a man in a coat walking a cold block reading door numbers. He parked 2 streets over and told Theo to wait, and he walked, and the walk itself did something to him, because Delary Street in the lower 9th Ward was not an abstraction the way a red cell on a spreadsheet is an abstraction. It was houses. Some of them rebuilt after the water and some of them never rebuilt, a gap-toothed block, a lot where a house used to be now grown over, a porch with a folding chair on it, a hand-lettered sign in a window for plate dinners on Sunday. A woman he did not know nodded at him from her steps, the way people on that block nodded at anybody who walked it like they belonged, and he nodded back and felt like a liar, because he had 1,100 employees within a mile of here whose rent went up a pipe just like this one, and he had never walked this street in his life. He found 1418. He saw the 2 papers taped to the door, the machine one and the signed one, Curtis Hale, Regional Property Manager, 11 days become 8 become, he did the count, 6. He saw the mark of a life being processed. He stood on the cold sidewalk of the lower 9th Ward and read an eviction notice the way you read the label on a thing you already own. He had signed papers like this. Not this one, but like it. Somewhere in a portfolio he half remembered approving, there were buildings, and buildings have units, and units have line items, and line items go red, and a version of Curtis Hale clicks a version of that box. And Desmond Ellery had spent 30 years being the man at the top of a pipe exactly like this one, and calling it logistics. and then he looked up at the window beside the door. Taped to the inside of the glass at a child's height, faded a little from the sun, was a drawing. Crayon. A red coat on a hook. A door beside it. And the door was standing open. A careful gap of white where the door met the frame, left uncolored on purpose. The way a child leaves the most important part of a drawing blank because coloring it in would say too much. Desmond Ellery had spent his life learning to read numbers on a page and know what they meant before anyone else in the room did. He looked at that open door in the window for a long time, and he did not yet know what it meant. But he knew it meant something. And he knew, standing in that cold, that he had finally found the person the coat had been pointing him toward for 39 years. And that he was not going to look away from her the way he had learned to look away from everything he closed and left in the last room. 6 days. A man who runs a distribution empire knows how to pull a chain. Desmond did not need a lawyer for the first part. He needed a title search. And a title search is public. 4 Main Delray Street was owned by an LLC in Dallas. The LLC was a holding of a fund. The fund contracted its management to Broadmoor Residential. Broadmoor's regional office on Poland Avenue had a regional manager, and the regional manager's name was on a piece of paper taped to a door 6 blocks from where Desmond stood. It took his people a day and a half to assemble what Desmond could have guessed in his sleep, because he had built the same kind of structure himself. Enough layers between the money and the door that no one at the top ever has to picture the door. He pulled the filing. Case 24E871. And there, in the metadata that tenants never see, was the thing that turned Desmond Ellery from a curious man into a moving one. The unit had been flagged for expedited processing 11 days ago. Manually. By user Chile. At 11:41 in the morning. Manually. By a person. With a name. Lorna Petit was the one who told him the rest, though she did not set out to. Desmond went back to the Poland Avenue office, and this time he was not entirely a stranger in a good coat. He asked questions that landed too precisely, and Lorna, behind the plexiglass, felt the floor of the thing she had been standing on for 6 years tilt a little. He asked her about expedited processing. He asked who benefited when a unit turned fast. He asked it gently, the way Boudreaux had once asked him things, leaving her a door to walk through with her back straight. And Lorna Petit, 39, with a car payment and a mother in Slidell and a job she could not lose, made a decision. People like her make it easily in the movies. In life, almost never. She told him about the bonus. She told him Curtis got $500 a unit for turning it inside a window. Turnover was a number on a board in the back. Curtis was chasing 12. She said Curtis was not a monster. She wanted the man in the good coat to understand that needed him to. Curtis had 2 kids in Metairie and a wife who'd been sick and a number he had to hit same as everybody. He did not hate these people. He just never let himself see them. And there was a difference between not hating someone and seeing them. And Curtis lived his whole working life in that difference. She said she had watched him flag Renata's unit, knowing the woman had walked in with $340 in an envelope and been turned away at this very counter. She said she'd been the one who turned her away. She said the printer made a sound she heard in her sleep. That was the math he did, Lorna said. And I did my own math every day I sat here and let it happen. I don't know if it was the right math. I know I hadn't answered that question yet. She looked at the coffee ring on the counter. I guess I'm answering it now. She was not cruel. She was not vindictive. She had a car payment. And on a cold Tuesday, with a stranger's gentleness giving her room, she chose to be the person the plexiglass had been asking her not to be. While Desmond was pulling a chain uptown, the thing everyone had been afraid of came for Micah in the dark. It was 2 in the morning, the coldest night of the freeze, and the tightness in his chest stopped being a thing he could count his way through. He sat up in the bed he shared with Aliyah and could not get the air in, and he reached under the pillow for the inhaler he had been rationing for 8 days. And he pressed it, and it gave him the one dose he had saved for a night worse than the others, and the night was worse than the others, and one dose was not enough. Renata heard the sound a mother hears through a wall in her sleep and is standing before she is awake. She was on the floor by the bed with him in a breath, and she took the inhaler and shook it and heard the thin, mostly air sound of it. And she understood, all at once, standing in the cold dark, how long he had been protecting her, and what it had cost, and she did not have 1 second to spend on that understanding, because her son could not breathe. Here is what the block did. She did not call an ambulance first. An ambulance was a bill she could see coming even in that moment. And this is a true and terrible sentence about this country, and she should not have had to think it. So she banged on the wall instead. The shared wall. Miss Charlene was up and over in 90 seconds, and Miss Charlene's nephew had a car, and Sister Beulah kept a nebulizer at the church from the last child on the block who'd needed one, and the phone tree that Beulah had built over 40 years for exactly this lit up pew by pew in the dark. Micah was at Israelite Baptist with a nebulizer mask on his face inside 20 minutes, at the emergency room by 3, stabilized by 4, and the whole apparatus that caught him was not a system with a button. It was a block that had decided long before this night to leave its doors open. He was all right. That is the thing to say plainly. Micah was all right. But Renata sat in a molded plastic chair at 4:30 in the morning, holding an empty inhaler she had believed for 8 days was full. And she did the newest and worst arithmetic of all. The arithmetic of what her child had carried alone, so that she would not have to carry it. And for the first time in this whole story, in a hallway where her children could not see her, she let it land on her face. Consider the woman doing this work. A home health aide in this country earns, on average, a wage that has hovered for years near the bottom of the labor market. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks it. The figure has long sat around $14 an hour, with a median annual wage that leaves a full-time aide near or below what counts as a living wage in most of the country. And many aides are not full-time. Full-time would mean benefits. So the hours get cut to 29 the way Renata's were. Here is the part that should stop you. The people who go into strangers' homes to keep the old and the sick and the dying clean and fed and turned, the people we trust with our grandparents, are themselves, in enormous numbers, one cut shift away from losing their own housing. Study after study finds home care workers among the most rent-burdened workers in the economy, a great many of them spending more than half of what they earn on the roof over their own children's heads. Renata Vaughn washed a 91-year-old man and turned him so his skin would not break, and called herself Corinne so he could eat his lunch in peace, and then walked home in the cold because the bus was $1.25 to a unit that a man uptown had flagged for turnover from a laptop in a parking lot. We built it this way. Not one villain. A pipe. A button. A bonus. A plexiglass divider. A whole architecture designed so that the person who presses the button never has to picture the door. Desmond had the whole picture now, and he did the thing he knew how to do. Ellery Provisions had a real estate arm. Every distribution company does, warehouses being real estate. And Desmond put it to work not as charity but as a transaction, which was the only language the pipe understood. He instructed his people to buy 418 Delary Street, not to bail out one tenant. To buy the building, the block of it, out from under the fund in Dallas, at a number the fund could not refuse, and to buy out or terminate the Broadmoor management contract in the process. The deal moved fast because money always moves fast when it wants to. The fund in Dallas did not care who was buying or why. It saw a bid above its own model and took it inside a week. That is the other truth about the pipe. The same speed that had flagged Renata's unit in 90 seconds could unflag a whole building overnight if the person at the top happened to want it. The machine had no conscience. It only had a direction. And for the first time, someone had turned it the other way. He did it the way he did everything, in his trade's vocabulary, line items, and closing dates. For once the language that had let him look away for 30 years was turned all the way around and pointed at the door. And then he asked one more question about the man named Curtis Hale, and what he learned was that Curtis had done all of it, the flag, the bonus chase, the turning away of a woman with $340, without technically breaking a single rule, because the rules had been written by people who made sure the cruelty was always procedural and never personal, always deniable, always somebody else's policy card in somebody else's drawer, which meant the mirror, when it came, would have to be procedural too. Desmond understood that. He had built enough of these machines to know exactly how to turn one around. He met Curtis Hale once in person before any of it moved. He did not have to. He wanted to. He went to the Poland Avenue office at the end of a business day and asked for the regional manager by name, and Curtis came out to the counter in his lanyard, mildly annoyed, because it was 4:50, and he had a leased sedan to get to and a turnover number to close, and he did not know the man in the good coat was the reason his whole quarter was about to disappear. Desmond did not raise his voice. He never did. He asked Curtis a few questions in his trade's vocabulary, the vocabulary Curtis lived in: turnover windows, per unit incentives, the relist rate on 4118B, which Desmond named to the dollar, 1350. Curtis answered easily at first, because these were his numbers, his native tongue, and it is pleasant to be asked about the thing you are good at. Then Desmond asked him if he knew the tenant's name. Curtis did not. Desmond asked if he knew there were 2 children in the unit. He did not. Desmond told him one of them had spent 8 days rationing an inhaler while Curtis chased his 12th turn. He told him the mother had walked into this office with $340 in an envelope and been sent away from this counter. Curtis said, and he was not lying, that he could not have known that. That the system doesn't show you that. That he just processes what comes up red. I know, Desmond said. That's the design. You never have to picture the door. I built companies on that exact design. I know it better than you do. He set a card on the counter, and it was not a threat. It was worse than a threat. It was just a name Curtis would recognize by the following Monday. The trouble with never picturing the door, Desmond said, is that one day somebody pictures yours. Then he left. And Curtis stood at the counter holding a card and a bad feeling he could not yet price. There was one more room Desmond had kept closed, and that night, after the hospital call came through Theo that the boy was all right, he opened it. He told Theo what happened to Yolanda. She lived. That was the answer to the question the whole story had been carrying since the car first stopped on St. Claude. The coat kept them through the freeze of '86. The bread and the milk it bought. The job Boudreaux gave him the next Monday. The coat Boudreaux put over his arm. Yolanda got through that winter and got through her cough and grew up, and Desmond had paid for the nursing program 4 decades ago that no one at the company could ever get him to explain. She had been a home health nurse. Of course she had. She had spent 30 years going into strangers' homes to keep the old and the sick and the dying clean and fed and turned, and she had died 2 years ago. And Desmond had endowed a scholarship in a name he would not attach to hers, because grief is a door some men can only leave open a crack. He had spent 39 years looking for the person the coat was pointing him toward. He understood now that she had been standing in a home health uniform the whole time on a block just like this one, and that he had been driving past her in the back of a warm car for most of his life. 6 days had become 2. The locks got changed before any of the good things could land. That is how these timelines actually run. The rescue moves at the speed of closing dates, and the harm moves at the speed of a man with a bonus to hit. And on the second to last day, before the sale of the building had finished clearing, before anyone told Renata anything, a locksmith Curtis had scheduled 2 weeks earlier showed up at 4118 Delary on the morning of the deadline and did the job on the work order, because the work order had not been canceled in a system that nobody had thought to check. Renata came home from a shift to a key that did not turn. Her key. In her door. On the block her grandmother had fed. And it did not turn. Everything she owned was on the other side of it. The cast iron pot. The Bible with a rubber band. 11 drawings of a coat on a hook by an open door. And the door itself was locked now, from the outside by a stranger, on a work order, and the cold had finally gotten in, not to her, but past her, into the one room she had spent everything to keep it out of. She stood on the sidewalk in the dark and did not have a coat because she had sold the coat, and for the first time in this whole story, Renata Vaughn ran out of arithmetic. There was no number to do. There was just a locked door and 2 children at Miss Charlene's and a cold that had finally won the thing she had been holding it off from for 8 days. That is where he found her. Desmond Ellery got the call from Theo. The locks, the work order nobody canceled, And he did not send a lawyer, and he did not send a locksmith of his own. He came himself. He had the coat with him. He had been carrying it in the car for 11 days, her coat, his coat, the same coat, and he got out on Delary Street in the cold and walked up to a woman standing on the sidewalk in front of a door that would not open. And he stopped a few feet away, because you do not crowd a person whose back is that straight. She looked at him. A stranger in a good coat holding her coat. She did not understand yet. She started to do the only thing she knew how to do with a stranger, which was to straighten up and close the subject. And Desmond held out the coat and said the thing he had been trying to find a person to say for 39 years. "Put it down," he said. "Whatever you're carrying, put it down. You already paid for it. You paid for it 38 years before you ever picked it up." His voice did not do the thing that ended meetings. It did a different thing. "I know exactly what you're carrying. I know what it costs to sell the coat off your own back so somebody smaller than you can eat. I did it in this same cold on a dock across town when I was 19, and a man saw me do it, and he told me it counted. So I'm going to tell you. It counts. You hear me? What you did counts. And you don't have to carry it by yourself anymore. Not tonight. Not alone." Renata Vaughn did not say anything. She did not say anything, and she did not need to, because the thing that happened on that sidewalk was not a transaction and had no words in it. She had spent 8 days, 5 years, 34 years, being unseen on purpose, being the one who does the low work like it's holy, who calls herself Corinne, who leaves no receipt, and a man she had never met had just described the inside of her own chest back to her, accurately in the cold, holding her grandmother's coat. She put it down. Whatever it was. You could see her put it down. And then she cried, finally on a public sidewalk where her children could not see her, in front of one stranger who had earned the right to watch her do it. Here is the thing about the door. For 21 years Renata had believed her grandmother's lesson was about who takes the cold. You sell the coat, you leave the door open, you stand in the doorway yourself and let the cold have you instead of them. She had understood it as a lesson about sacrifice, about being the one who stands in the gap. She had it half right. Because Aliyah, who was 5, who had never been taught the lesson in words, who only knew the coat and the hook and the door, had drawn it right every single time without knowing she was correcting her mother. She never drew the door closed against the cold. She drew it open. And she left the gap uncolored, the white space where the door meets the frame. And when Renata had asked her once what it was for, Aliyah had said the truest thing anyone says in this whole story. So they can come in. The open door was never about letting the cold have you. That was the part Des knew and never got to finish saying. You leave the door open so the cold is welcome to you and not to them, yes. But a door you leave open is also a door someone can walk through. It is not only a sacrifice. It is an invitation. Des fed the block with the door open for 40 years, not because she was surrendering to the cold, but because an open door is how a person on that street told another person, "There is room. Come in. You are not carrying it alone." Renata had left her own door open a hand's width the night she sold the coat, out of a reflex she could not have explained, and 11 days later a man had walked through it. Selling the coat isn't losing your warmth. It's deciding in the cold that someone else's warmth counts more than yours. And an open door isn't losing your shelter. It's deciding that your shelter was always meant to have someone else in it. Desmond Ellery walked through the open door. Everything after that was downslope, and downslope is supposed to be quiet. The building sale cleared. The eviction, case 2024 EV 8871, was vacated. Not settled. Vacated. Wiped, as though the button had never been pressed, and the mark that would have followed Renata to the next rental office, and the one after that was gone before it could do to her what it had done to her cousin Deja. The $2,340 in back rent dissolved into a closing statement she never had to read. And the unit at 4118 Delary, with the cast iron pot and the Bible and the 11 drawings still inside it, became hers on paper in a way it had never been in 5 years of on-time payments, deeded stable, off the pipe entirely. But that was not the part that mattered, and Desmond knew it was not, because he had learned the whole lesson from Boudreaux, and not just the money half of it. He did not write Renata a check and feel the warm thing. He offered her a job. A real one at Ellery Provisions, in the part of the company that trained and placed home care workers. The part he had built quietly, years ago in a name he would not explain, that everyone assumed was a tax thing and was actually a grave he tended. He offered her a CNA scholarship track, the same track he had paid for once before. For a girl of 8 who grew up and spent 30 years turning strangers so their skin would not break. He did not offer it as rescue. He offered it as recognition, as a fact about what she already was, a woman who did the holy low work with competent hands. And he made her say yes to it the way Boudreaux had made him say yes, dressed as a favor, so her back would stay straight. She took it the way Des took the coffee can from Beulah. Not as charity. As insurance finally paid out on a policy her grandmother had been funding off a porch for 40 years. And the man who never had to picture the door got put out of his own. The Broadmoor contract terminated with the sale. Curtis Hale's whole regional book of business, the buildings, the turnover board, the 12 he was chasing, evaporated into a transaction closed by a man in a good coat he had spoken to across a counter for 4 minutes and failed to recognize. There was a severance. Curtis asked, through the proper channels, for it to be paid in a lump rather than the partial schedule the new term specified. Because he had 2 kids in Metairie, and a wife who'd been sick and a number he needed made whole. The answer came back in 9 words he had typed 100 times himself. No partial exception. Policy applies. Terms as written. He read it twice, standing up the way Renata had read the notice on her door. And on his last day, Curtis Hale carried a box out of an office, whose locks were changed that same afternoon, put out the same door he had put her out of, given no exception he had never once given anyone else. It was not cruelty. Desmond had been specific about that. It was procedure turned around at last and pointed the other way. The machine had no conscience. It only had a direction. And for once it ran toward the person who deserved to feel it. Whether that was justice or only symmetry is a question the story leaves for you. But the door that Curtis walked out of and the door that Renata's key finally turned in again that same week were in the end the same door. One man had spent his life making sure he never had to picture it. The other had finally walked through it. Renata Vaughn is not real. Neither is Desmond or Curtis or the coat with the black button. This story is fictional. But the systems it describes are real, and you already knew that, because nothing in it surprised you. The eviction filings are real. Landlords file millions of times a year in this country, and the eviction lab at Princeton, which had to build the database itself, because no one had ever bothered to count in one place, has spent years showing how a single filing, dismissed or not, becomes a mark that follows a family into the next application and the one after that. The no partial payment wall is real, and so is the third-party management firm working off a policy card in a drawer, and so is the bonus tied to how fast a unit that has gone red can be emptied and relisted higher. The wages are real. A home health aide, one of the people we hand our grandparents to, earns a wage that has sat for years near the bottom of the labor market, and a great many of them spend more than half of what they make on their own rent. The child rationing an inhaler in a cold apartment is real. The link between unstable, under-heighted housing and childhood asthma is one of the most documented things in public health. We ask the people who keep the sick warm to go home and be cold. So before the story closes, the resources, because a story like this is worthless if it only makes you feel something. If you or someone you know is facing eviction or a utility shutoff, dial 211. It is free. It connects you to local emergency help in most of the country, and it is the first call, not the last resort. Ask specifically about LIHEAP, the federal program that helps with heating bills, before the disconnect notice becomes a disconnection. If a filing has already been served, do not walk into that courtroom alone. Legal aid exists. It is free. And in Southeast Louisiana, that means Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. And wherever you are, it means a legal aid office that would rather hear from you 11 days early than the morning of. And if the low holy work is what you do, if you are the one with the competent hands, community colleges run CNA to RN scholarship tracks in every state, and the door is more open than the pipe wants you to believe. Verify the specifics for your own city. The details change, the point does not. Now the part that isn't a resource. Somewhere tonight, a woman is standing at a counter deciding whether to keep her coat or feed her child. A 7-year-old is shaking an inhaler next to his ear. A clerk behind plexiglass is doing math she will have to answer for later. A man in a warm car is driving past all of it on the way to somewhere, learning to look away. Most of the time, no one walks through the door. Renata's grandmother left hers open for 40 years off a porch in the lower 9th Ward, and she was not surrendering to the cold when she did it. She was saying the only thing worth saying to another person on a hard street. There is room, come in, you are not carrying it alone. Selling the coat isn't losing your warmth. Leaving the door open isn't losing your shelter. Both of them are the same decision, that someone else's warmth counts, and that your shelter was always meant to have another person in it. You cannot buy every building. Most of us cannot buy any. But every one of us can be the person who does not look away, who sees the sacrifice and says the 4 words out loud that cost nothing and change everything. It counts, I see. Leave a door open for someone this winter. Not for the algorithm. For the conversation.